Welcome everybody to the Augmented Society Network. This is a Fellows thematic network as part of the RSA. Our topic for February is the Scorched battlefield of aesthetics and health. So there is plenty to discuss this morning. To kick us off, what we're looking for today really is to discuss how potentially things may have gone too far in terms of the aesthetic, and how sometimes we don't make the best decisions when it comes to our health or the world around us. And we are determining that on potentially some inherent biases or perspectives, or the feeling that others' opinions matter more than our own. We also want to look at how decisions are made more widely when the way something looks takes over from the good it should do, and how those kinds of decisions are made within organizations, within the societies and communities that we live in. So I'm going to hand over to Julie Samuels, the co-lead of the Augmented Society Network, to take us into the topic. Julie.
Thank you. So thank you for introducing Zoe. Myself and Zoe, we had a very interesting conversation about the theme and what it might cover. So I came with a series of kind of questions. Do beautiful things make our lives feel better? Do beautiful things reflect our standing in society? Does it matter if we are judged by what we own, achieve, or what we look like? Who is judging us? Are we judging ourselves? Are we putting pressure on ourselves? Or is it society kind of expecting certain things of us? Do cultural differences affect our perception of what is beautiful? Some cultures, tattooing and piercings and extended earlobes are seen as attractive. Some cultures maybe not so. Who decides what is aesthetically beautiful, pleasing, and how does it impact on our physical and mental health? So obviously, with social media, the idea, we present ourselves in a certain way, what is beautiful? Who applies the pressure to make us feel and look and behave in a certain way? Is it you, me, family, friends, the media? Why do we spend so much time trying to be like other people? And who gets listened to when we have all these conversations about beauty and what is measured as kind of, acceptable? Is it the one who speaks the loudest, the one that is, or is the one that's visually more pleasing? And then another thought I don't know if you've heard of her. Myself and Zoe had a woman, a German lady, and her name is called Martina Big. And she's a white lady, and what she's actually done is over the years she's taken various kinds of injections and surgery to make herself look what she considers herself to be a black person. But it's probably for me the worst cultural appropriation in its worst form. So you have a time, have a look at her. So for her, she decided that she wanted to be black. She wanted to be African. So she's basically done lots of different types of surgery to make herself look a certain way. So who judges myself as a black woman? She does not look like me. She doesn't represent me. She doesn't represent other black women, but she sees herself as looking like, in her eyes, what a black woman would look like. So if you get a chance, have a look at her quickly, and then I'll leave it open to everyone else to start the discussion. So thank you very much.
I am very proud to say that Julie is taking over my position as a co-lead of this with Zoe. I'm really proud of what we've done with the Augmented Society Network. And I'm so pleased that Julie has stepped up to take that, because that's what this network is all about, is people coming together to share, to create, to really look at what the possible futures are. And when we talked about program today, in my mind, I was thinking a lot about what are the decisions that we as organizations, businesses, society, people, whatever, make in the moment, because it might be construed as pleasing, whether it's how people are going to accept us or what data we have available to us, whether it's something as big as decisions surrounding a pandemic, or decisions surrounding governance, or even I live in a really great apartment in Marina Del Rey area of Los Angeles. A lot of choices that they made in terms of how they decorated, how they what sinks they put in. They look fantastic, but they don't work well, right? So I've got this beautiful stainless sink in the kitchen, but the bottom is flat. So luckily they did do where you can pull that sprayer to spray everything in the corners, because otherwise there's like, that's one of those things where it was aesthetically pleasing, but not a healthy piece. And I'm really excited to see where we go in this conversation, because I think there are a lot of wide-ranging illustrations of where we went for aesthetics over health. And we're not just talking about physical health, but certainly mental health, and choices that are made in the moment without looking back or forward, and how we can all be mindful of those pieces before making the snap decision to set forth in motion something that could have huge impact. Another thing just to be thinking about as we talk about this is, how do we change our direction, our trajectory based on new data that comes at us? Because that too is something that the way we're seeing a lot of things go is somebody makes a decision for whatever valid reason at the beginning, that they then don't shift when new information becomes available. I'll just throw this out there. Back in December of 2020, when everybody was figuring out what's going on with these vaccines, the UK decided that instead of doing the 3 or 4 week interval that the trials were done for those vaccines, they were going to spread it out to 12 weeks, because they figured it was better to have more people with at least a first jab than fewer people with both the first and second jab, right? It was completely for that reason, to get more people to have the first jab. It wasn't like they had all this data to look at, like the efficacy with the lengthened duration between. From that, they found that the longer duration between the first and second jab actually accounted for a higher antibody count. And so it had a long-term better effect than doing it in the 3 or 4 weeks. And that I saw published in BBC back in April. I didn't even have access to get shots here in Los Angeles until as early as May. But I saw in April, I was like, oh, wow, that's really interesting information. I wonder if they're going to make a change. And there was this big push about everybody getting the vaccines, but there was no push about, wait, what's the data that we're finding in real time? What are other countries doing? And then making a change based off that. It was still, nope, we're going to do it 3 or 4 weeks. And just on February 4th, the CDC, they have an advisory committee of both employees of the CDC and also doctors that have been chosen, and other professionals that have been chosen to be a part of this committee, where they just discussed for the first time on the 4th, the fact that there was more antibodies produced from the longer duration in between. And also that they found that with that other side effect that they found with myocarditis in more typically men between the ages of 18 and 39, they found that if they were to spread that out over 8 weeks between the first and second jab, that would reduce the instances of myocarditis. So these have been promoted elsewhere, but it was the first time, as far as we can tell, that the CDC actually discussed it as a possibility moving forward. And I'm happy that they did, but it's a question of how long it took and whether they'll make a change, because in that same presentation, they put out there what the bad byproduct of doing this is. And one of the 2 things that they mentioned was people won't be able to travel, or people won't be able to live their lives freely, which then begs the question, why are we doing this? So that people can travel and live freely, or because we want people to be as healthy as possible? Which really fed right into the topic. So I'm really interested in other examples and getting deeper into what we as society can do and be mindful of in order to move ahead and not allow ourselves to get caught in the corners as opportunity is all around us.
And is that something that really does need to be revisited? Erin and I were discussing yesterday on how information is shared, how the smaller pieces of information that could be very useful to you are not visible, and how would you make those visible, and how people in certain places are able to access information, but others who are not are the ones that would potentially benefit from it much, much more. I don't know, Erin, if you want to talk about some of the work that you're doing on this. And I know, Carlos, the idea that we need to move to being our authentic selves, and our authentic selves are not how we are living currently, which goes back to what Julie was talking about at the beginning about who is actually controlling us. Even when I'm alone, I have an inner self that is saying, oh, I'm not sure you should do that, or you shouldn't be doing that, or what would someone think if they were seeing you do this? It's mind-blowingly annoying, and I'm working on removing that voice from my life. But I don't know, I don't know if anyone else has that voice of I'm sure you do, I'd be amazed if you didn't, of the inner control, which is affected by where I've lived, how I grew up, how I got acceptance from my parents will have an impact on how I behave now. And actually, I was talking to a psychologist about this, and I was trying to work out why I always want to just have fun and laugh at things. And I was the one at school who would always be dragged out because I just made a joke at the expense of learning something incredible. I would see something funny and just go for that. So why was I like that? The humor overriding the greater good. And some of that's to do with how I got approval, I think, or not, from those around me. So this is absolutely intrinsic in how we all are.
Yeah, I guess so. What I'm doing is working with, just to step back a smidgen, I'm working with a team on the cordial exchange, and what we're really trying to do is leverage the power of diversity to really define higher order solutions that work for everyone. And so the first project there is really with 5 boroughs of South London to really disintermediate in a way, like have people step forward as active residents and citizens and speak to issues. And really what we want to do is capture people's lived experience, right? Because, any of us can walk in, who is it? Ms. Big could walk in and say, as a Black person, here's what and any of us could say anything, but until they hear other voices, they think that that's the perspective, that's the reality, right? And so how do we begin to show prismatic, colorful view, whether it's racial identity, whether it's lifestyle, whether it's neurodiversity, all of these different things that make us up. We're many different things. We're not one thing, to bring to these problems. And what I found working with companies in innovation, that it's really these secret abilities that we have nowhere to bring in the regular workplace that are the things that unlock new solutions. And so how do we create an environment? This is what I'm interested in. How do we create an environment that feels comfortable to bring forward all of that stuff, the humor that gets you kicked out of class? I was occasionally, all of that. There's a place where that is the beautiful thing that leads to the right answer. And how do we start to mix populations to live more authentically and abundantly? And so that's really what we're setting out to do. And so how do you find people solving complex problems, not easy ones that you would Google, but ones that have no answer already, and combine that with lived experience and empathy for all these different perspectives, and then explore these tensions that seem to keep us apart, and poke at them a little bit and figure out what kind of solutions are possible, try them out, capture data, and learn from there. So that's in a nutshell. Not sure if I exactly answered your question, so
I don't want you to. That's perfectly fine. That's great. And Carlos, that's a world that you are very much interested in and working on. And you produced a piece for our paper last year, the reimagining of learning, discussing living an authentic self and educare.
Well, I don't know if you have touched this, sorry to be late, is, I don't know, another place, but this is the place for doing that. It's about what is to be alive in terms of the debate that Jonathan was talking about, this COVID And I remember last year living in Weston, in Florida. I know it's touched by a political reason, but it was more like freedom. And it was important to go outside, and then took a trip to San Francisco. And I met personally Jonathan, part of his family, which was great. And it was another world. It was nobody at the airport. Everything was closed. It's a very difficult decision for a politician and for a mother, for anybody, is what do I want? Do I want to live an authentic, passionate, I don't know how to say in English, dignified life, but maybe shorter? Or do I want a longer life, but without the risk of dying? Because at the end, that's the point. And you can translate this health issue to, I don't know if this is the word in English, euthanasia. And with all due respect with your beliefs, abortion. So at the end, for me, is between dignity and living an authentic life. Is not about life and death. It's about life with dignity or without dignity. But that's a very complex point. And well, I personally experienced myself, my family, with my mother. It was not a legal, technical euthanasia, but we had here in Colombia the Fundación para Morir Dignamente, which will be translated Foundation to Live with Dignity. So you had to sign a document. I don't know how it is in the US. So with that document, it's not legally binding, but you can go to the doctor and say, look, this was signed by my mother. So the doctor said it's 30% of chance that she will recover if we do this treatment. But she was against this intensive treatment. It was a difficult decision. I have 3 brothers, 2 sisters, and they didn't want to, they knew that we have to do it, but they didn't have the strength to do it. So I had to talk with the doctor and said, change the treatment, take her out, UC. She was gone in a week. So it's a very difficult decision, but that was her decision. So I think we are so afraid of dying that we end up not living a passionate, authentic life. And the best one example of this is the book, the great book by Bronnie Ware, The 5 Regrets of the Dying. So once you are in that zone, that you know that you're going to die, then you realize, I should have done this. But how can you put this on the healthcare system? That's going to be a huge challenge. But we should go toward that. And instead of living longer lives with no passion, I will prefer a shorter, full of passion and joy and love. So the healthcare system should do that, like Patch Adams or something like that.
I just had a quick comment. Thank you. And it was very much people who had older parents were very much going through that decision, you know, a shorter, more passionate life. Or and if we think about things that we design for, so my background is in design, is the rendering of intent. And so we should be able to design our life or design our death the way we want it, right? And that's, the laws should accommodate that, because not to bring up the euthanasia or abortion stuff or anything either, but who is the government to control how I want to live my life if I'm not harming anyone else? It's just my personal philosophy. And so how do we, I think Atul Gawande said, you know, being mortal, he really had something to say about that. And what are those things that make life worth living, and how to get really clear on those. There's also a beautiful book by the Yalams. They wrote it together as his wife was dying, and I'll find it and put it in the text. But thanks for, Alicia, thanks for letting me weigh in. I think she may have just stepped away.
I think that the interesting thing is, and it's been mentioned about availability to information, right? And Mitch sort of talks about this in his message that he put in the chat about people in power, economic or political, you know, taking sort of, we are set forth on a channel, narrow channel that only has one path, that keeps us from seeing, from having access to, again, these possibilities So even as Carlos mentioned, the book, I don't know how many people might know about that book. I don't know how many, I know I've got a different perspective on death than a lot of people do. My mother included, we talk about our parents. My mother is not well, and I'm wishing that she could embrace the possibilities. I will also say something that's hit really close to home. My wife went through breast cancer treatment 6 years ago. Based on that, it was like everything was in motion. Everybody said, well, you should be happy you're alive.
Can I just say that what Jonathan said, but there's the idea of the beauty, a beautiful woman has beautiful breasts. So
that's the other part of it too.
Straight away, they're
Yes.
removed. They have to be replaced. Otherwise, visually, you don't look like a woman, a beautiful woman, because part of your body is missing. And that is part of the culture, isn't it, as well, of what is beauty?
Yes.
How we judge a woman, how is she defined? She might be the most intelligent person in the world, but she's got no breasts, and suddenly is she not a woman anymore? That shouldn't define her, but it does.
One of the things I was going to mention, actually, Erin, you mentioned Atul Gawande, and I was going to say to Carlos that he would probably find Atul Gawande. I don't know if you'd actually heard of him before or watched the Wreath lectures that he gave in, I think, 2018. But there's a lot of talk about end-of-life care there, and you would probably find that really, really interesting. I was kind of responding to Erin's original stuff that she was talking about, and I'm not that interested in beauty, but I am interested in perception. And I work in the area of food poverty. And Erin was talking about difficult problems and how to find solutions for them, and that's exactly what I do. That's what we do, is we work with what is a really wicked problem of food poverty, and try and understand why people don't feed themselves well, because that's the leading cause of death in the UK for people in poverty. And I think there's some really interesting things that we found, which are also backed up by research as well. But a lot of the work that we've done and what we found has been about creating a space for people to talk about the issues that they have. It's actually a bit more than that. It's actually giving them a space to experiment a little bit, I think, because if you ask people what their problems are, the thing that I've observed, having now worked with probably 7,000 people, is that they don't actually even know themselves what their problems are. So they'll identify a problem, and then you'll solve that problem, and they still won't change. And then you'll really sort of dig around in there and try and figure out. So a lot of this is about perceptions, I think, of like, I don't know if this is helpful to anyone really, I'm just reflecting on stuff. But one of the things that I found quite interesting is perceptions around healthy eating is a really good example. So that because of the way that society has sort of created this wellness sort of juggernaut, and the whole superfoods thing, and the TV programs talking about, you know, how amazing, you know, the healthy food this is and all this kind of stuff, and it's all really expensive. This has become a class issue, and I don't know if this is such an issue in the US, but I would say in the UK, I actually think it probably is. I think it's Anglo-Saxon cultures particularly. Food is a class issue, and people don't feel that they eat certain kinds of foods, or even that they're entitled to eat certain kinds of foods. It's a really interesting thing. So if you look at healthy eating, people think that and there's research that backs this up as well, but we've certainly observed this. People think it's too expensive for them. If you're in poverty, you don't do it because you think it's going to be more expensive, because you hear about, you know, goji berries and they cost whatever they cost, you know. I mean, quinoa, which you can't even spell, and you can't find it in the supermarket because you don't know how it's spelt. And anyway, it's expensive. It's too expensive for you. There's this whole thing. And one of the things that really struck me, and this woman was actually on our pilot course, but she now works for us. But I remember her sitting there talking to a bunch of people, and she said, you know, you look on TV and you see Jamie Oliver, and he talks about buying the most expensive olive oil that you can find. And she said, I have to shop at Iceland. That isn't for the likes of me. That kind of food is not for the likes of me. And that was a really interesting observation, that sort of, it's not for the likes of me, and that exclusionary thing. And I mean, this isn't really about beauty, but I feel it's connected. It's about what society is pushing on you as expectations of it's that whole societal pressure thing, I think. And also there's quite a bit in there entangled in that is that sense of self-worth of, do you even deserve this? Because, you know, you can't afford that stuff. It's not, you don't really deserve good food. You should eat crap, really. And one of the shocking statistics is, well, I mean, I'll give you a few statistics that I think kind of sort of illustrate the issues that we come up against. First of all, a lot of people think, well, you know, people in poverty, they need to eat better. They need to learn to cook. They're eating all this takeaways. So people in poverty eat 7 times more takeaways. The bottom 10% of society eat 7 times more takeaways than the top 10% of society. That's the first thing to notice, right? Which I think is a really shocking statistic. The other thing that you need to know is that they have the same cooking skills as the top 10%. So it's not about the fact that they don't know how to cook. So what is it? And we found that a big chunk of it, I mean, there is finances and but a big chunk of it is psychology. What do you even think you ought to be eating? Is it chicken nuggets? You know, is it all this highly processed stuff? Do you deserve healthy food because you can't really afford it anyway? So there's some just really interesting things. I just thought I'd throw it out there.
Just to add quickly, it makes me think about when you're at the supermarket, you've got all your food on the conveyor, and you see people glancing across to see what you've got. So if somebody's got lots of junk food, and they're you know they're larger in size, you assume, well, they're that size because they only eat the rubbish. But maybe they might have an underlying health issue, conditions with chromosomes where there is obesity, but you judge them because of what you've seen they've got on the conveyor belt, what they're paying for, don't you?
When we used to run, and we don't do this anymore, we do different things now, but when we used to run physical cooking lessons, what really struck me was we hardly ever saw anyone that was very obese. And I can remember very distinctly one woman showing up who was really obese, and also observing myself and my reactions. Same. And I think, and the conclusion I've come to why we didn't see people that were very obese was because I think they did not want to be seen around food. Because everyone watches them. I was watching her at the corner of my eye like a hawk. You want to see how much does she eat? You know, how do you manage to be that large? And I mean, it mystified me really, because we had a few, and one of them in particular that I can remember, and really not very many, but one of the earlier ones that we had. I mean, through her engagement with us, she lost more than half her body weight. So, you know, you can have a massive impact, but they just didn't show up. Yeah, I think, you know, there is all that judgment around food. And actually what we do now is we work with people in their own homes, so we don't have that kind of judgment. And I think that probably helps quite a lot. But I have
some cultures, big is beautiful in some cultures, isn't there? Some cultures, big is beautiful.
Mitchell posted something a while back in the chat, and piggybacking off of Erin's words of lived experience, what I'd like to sort of unpack here is another aesthetic related to behavior, and specifically that which is commonly and critically referenced when discussing neurodiverse individuals, many of whom I'm fortunate enough to contribute to through my research. Full disclosure, my work's inspired by our 18-year-old daughter, Phoebe, who was diagnosed at a very young age with coexisting conditions of both autism and epilepsy. And my wife and I had the great benefit, we still have the great benefit, of struggling with, learning through Phoebe's diagnosis, forming a village of support around Phoebe, and then embarking at the tender age of 55 on a PhD in London, myself, and witnessing all of this through a much broader lens outside of the States, and whilst residing here in the States, even though taking courses and conducting research abroad. And with regard to what I've witnessed, and in speaking with those who have invisible differences, such as autism or ADHD and other cognitive neuro diagnoses, I've noticed that regarding aesthetics and behavior, there is a criticality that's highly apparent and exacerbated in the workplace, in higher education institutions, and certainly in social venues. And if you put that aside for a moment and you move toward an ethical metric we often reveal ourselves when recognizing someone's aesthetic and how different it is from what we deem to be acceptable or how we act. Now, this is not only marginalizing, but it has a tremendous and deleterious effect on the other person's autonomy, authenticity. We see so many young women who camouflage their aesthetic in order to hide their neuro differences, and of course their ability to navigate and be successful in life. So understanding, and this comes back to Erin, their lived experience in solving this complex problem is something that requires great care. And I thank you for allowing me to voice that here today. I appreciate it.
I'm here today because I'm really interested in the aspect of authenticity and how willing we are to just give it up. I mean, we really are. We've just, with technology, I think it's really a powerful tool. And through technology, we've just kind of sort of said, give up on who we really are because we're so influenced by others. And why is that happening? I mean, Facebook is a perfect example. We have such great power. Why in the world is anyone using Facebook? Why? Why is anybody utilizing that tool? If it isn't in the best interest of all of us, why aren't we stopping it? Why do we just keep doing what we do, knowing that it has the outcomes that it has? You know what I'm saying? I guess that's just my interest, is that as an individual, we are giving up our power to tools that I don't think are necessarily in our best interest. But I don't know why we're so willing to do that. I just don't get it. I don't get it.
It's the channels we're put forward in where we feel like we have to do those things. Like we can't be authentic. We've got to put up this pretty picture of ourselves, which if enough of us were to break free of that and just be authentic, imagine what could happen.
Yes.
There was the results of a survey yesterday, and excuse me for not remembering the organization, but it was reported how happy you were with your life and how happy you are with the future of your country. And there was an increase in the personal happiness and a decrease in the happiness with the direction of your country. And the discussion around that and on self and the importance of self over everything else going to hell in a handcart was what was the most concerning element of that work. And I think, Linda, that speaks to what you're talking about there. There is an element, and I know, Erin, we talked about it yesterday, an element of what is it actually we're giving up and what is the price that is going to have going forward.
Yeah, if I may, I'm finding it very highbrow. I'm not normally on the philosophical side. I'm a very, very practical person, once a surgeon, so you can imagine that would be where I come from. There's a few things, actually. I mean, first of all, it seems that we're all taking a very Western civilization view. Especially, and I suppose the United States is particularly, coming across in that way. I mean, I've literally just come back from Sri Lanka a couple of weeks ago, and we spent a day, my wife and I, in a country village, and none of this begins to affect people like that across all of India, large parts of Asia and Africa. It's very much, we're talking about the problems and struggles of Western civilization. And we got down to it. My wife said she'd fancy doing some cooking, and the lady of the hut, it was a lovely, lovely lady, took her out into a sort of plot of earth outside, and they my wife Fran picked some plants, and she told Fran how to make a curry, and it was on a wood fire in a little utensil which they'd obviously had for years and years and years. Something none of us in Western civilization would normally dream about using or buying. We were pretty well eating off banana leaves and things like that. So it's a very different place, and we've got to remember, I think, that attitudes in different parts of the world will be different. Just coming back to some of the things actually that Jonathan was talking about. It sort of worries me to hear these stories about the way you sort of come across medicine. To me, medicine is about listening. Voltaire and he was right in his time, said that medicine was the art of entertaining the patient while nature cured the disease. And actually, there's a lot in that. And the old arts of medicine, listening, compassion, empathy, giving time, are just fundamental. And the fact that you haven't had some of that, and you've had to find out this stuff, and you haven't been listened to, and people in the end of life, you know, relatives should listen to their patients, to their relatives. Doctors should listen to their patients, because a lot of patients increasingly are saying the quality of life at the end of my life is much more important than it is the survivability. And if we listened more, that would come across more. I mean, I don't want to go on, but one point I would just take on Alicia. I think she's still there. I mean, she mentioned Jamie Oliver. Well, Jamie Oliver, who I do some work with, and the olive oil. In fact, it's right that the most expensive olive oil is by far the most healthy at the end of the day, and the cheap olive oils are not healthy. But he also does a huge amount of work in schools. He's written a book on, you know, £5 a week diets. So we mustn't think it's all, you know, a lot of his work is at the top end, but an awful lot of it too, he spends probably more time trying to get good food in schools and cheap food in schools, telling people how they can have a good diet cheaply. So which I think really is very, very important. You can have good food and it doesn't have to be costly.
But 80% of the people we work with who have crap diets know how to cook, but they're not. And, you know, no amount of throwing cheap recipes at them is going to solve that problem. The problem lies elsewhere. And that is the issue.
It's a huge problem. I mean, what he's trying to do and what I'm working with him on is a thing called Bite Back 2030, which is trying to halve childhood obesity in the UK by 2030. And it's much, much more, as you say, than what he's saying. It's education, it's a whole range of cultural things, and it's a big, big issue, and it's hard to tackle.
If you think it's teaching people to cook, that is not the solution.
No.
That is a very, very important part of the whole thing, basically. And a lot of it is around psychology.
So it's about understanding what the problem is that you're trying to fix, and that is where time is not well spent.
To be clear, Alicia, you said that poor people in the UK, they eat more junk food than the wealthiest, even though they could cook cheap recipes, but they don't want to. Is that what you said?
It's access to foods in supermarkets. It's access to restaurants in the area. If they need to walk to places, and the only places that are available are fast food restaurants or quick service restaurants.
There's a higher concentration of fast food restaurants in poor areas. Yeah, that's one of the issues. There are lots of other issues as well. Yeah, it's possibly access to places to buy food, but that's not the predominant reason, I would say. I think a lot of it is around perception, the perception of how much time it will take you. Food preferences are a big part of the issue. You know, so there are a lot of things. I mean, we've identified probably about 25 different things, and you can drill down within those as well. But the actual cooking skills, which is what the world generally identifies, and Jamie Oliver generally identifies as being the problem, is actually only probably 5% of the problem, in fact.
No, I agree with Alicia. It's not the cooking skills. It's what you believe is good for you. It's what you buy. Different cultures have completely different approaches, and some of them are very good approaches, actually, as you can see when you go to places like Sri Lanka. But no, it's not just the cooking skills. It's many more aspects to the obesity problem that we perceive.
And again, I think we go back to the what problem is it that we're trying to fix? And I know from my professional experience, I have probably spent most of my time fixing the wrong problem. Is something that as again, same as Erin and Linda, we are involved in design thinking, and we're involved in the way that things get made and presented, and how money is spent on all sorts of different levels. And getting to the point of understanding the problem is something that is incredibly important, and there are many additional tools that we can use that aren't being used at the moment. And I think once we understand how to create data that's built ethically, is sourced equitably, which I'm asking an awful lot of here, when we have that kind of information, it really does have to be brought into the process. We are actually running out of time.
Can I just get to like something that might put a button on this whole thing? Is it keeps on coming back. If we want to talk about that larger problem, is that we as a society are so quick to judge based on the surface, based on what's right in front of us. So to David's point about the child that is neurodiverse, I know I've got that issue. That's part of what led to us launching Engineering Empathy next week. It's about looking at what is the cause of this, as opposed to, oh, that person's obese, this is what they're going to do, my assumption of what they're going to do. We do this as society all the time. If we could stop to think deeper than what's on the surface, that too is a huge opportunity. And we are missing that every step of the way in business, government, community, everything.
I think I would say, going back to Zoe, you were saying that you're often trying to fix things and you get it wrong. I would say that actually one of the first things that I've always said when talking about this problem of poor diets is that if you ask the wrong question, you will 100% of the time get the wrong answer.
Yeah.
And I think most people ask the wrong questions. And the first thing is to get the question right. You know,
and then to listen.
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree. I was sort of joking, by the way. I am actually relatively good at what I do, or at least I think I am.
And that's actually what
and
that's actually what Einstein said. He said if he has a problem and he has an hour to solve the problem, he'd like to put 50 minutes into figuring out what the right question is. And once he has the right question, then he'll put 10 minutes into solving the problem.
Yeah.
I did not know that, but that's a great quote.
It's a good point. Yeah.
But you know, going to what you were saying, I mean, this is the really interesting conundrum in this whole thing, because yes, it's about listening. But as I say, so many of the people that we have worked with did not know what their problems were. They identified one thing, and then when you fix that problem, it still didn't change. They didn't change, and you had to really dig around. And I would say most of the people that go through our program and miraculously suddenly are cooking all the time, most of them have no idea how we did it. And if you ask them how, they will identify things that are not the reason that they are cooking, in fact. So it is really interesting. So at one level, yes, you do need to listen, but you kind of need to, I actually, what I say, which sounds kind of arrogant, and I don't mean it to be, but what I'm interested in is what their problems are. I'm not interested in what they think the solutions are.
Yeah.
Because you know what, you spent your whole life failing to improve your diet. And so me asking you what you think your solutions are is comic. And actually I've had funders that have asked me to ask them what they think the solutions are. And they want me to design a whole program of what people think their solutions are. And I'm like, are you winding me up? You know, I mean, it's really interesting. So it is a weird combination of, yes, you do need to listen, but what I listen to really hard are what their problems are.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think on that note, unless Julie, you wanted to do any rounding up at all.
No, it's been really, really enjoyable. It's been a very, very wide discussion, which has been wonderful. There's just been some interesting kind of angles that have come from it, and it's really, really interesting. But that, like I said, you know, think about the cultural differences is really, really important. Like I said, how we perceive, how we judge things, and we are hard on ourselves because, you know, there are these kind of standards that come from somewhere that we try and work towards, we try to achieve. Now, my son is neurodiverse, so I have, Zoe knows, I have a whole host of challenges but actually what he provides me was a really, really exciting and interesting view of the world. Every day is an adventure, not always a pleasurable adventure, but every day is an adventure. And seeing that, you know, how he judges things, how he sees things. I think if we were all neurodivergent, the world would be a better place. That's all I
agree. I totally agree. Roman is I love listening to him because it's some of the best advice that you'll ever get from Roman. He's 9, isn't he?
10, just turned 10. And I'm sure
Yeah.
David's daughter is very much the same. Say what they think.
Yeah.
And that's fact. And there we go. That,
And
like I said,
Jonathan.
if we were like that,
It'd be
you know,
great.
yeah, it would be wonderful.
No filter.
But no,
Yeah.
no,
Well,
yeah.
that is
Yeah, no
definitely
filter.
Roman. There, yes,
Yeah, no
he said things
filter.
to me that are kind of like, whoa, okay.
Yeah.
But anyway, on that note, we're going to draw to a close. Our next session is on the 17th of March, same time, same place. And what we've come to realize is that there are so many things that we want to discuss. We want to share that decision making with the group so that we can actually plan going forward based on what people want rather than what Julie and I think is important. So we're turning the camera back onto you and asking that you join us for that session. In April, we're also launching our creativity project. Julie and I have been working more Julie on funding, and it's getting pretty exciting, actually.
It's going to be fantastic.
Otherwise, have a fantastic day. It's been great to see everybody, and hopefully we will see you next month. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you,
Bye.
everybody. Bye.
Bye.